Hello students, in previous few parts we have seen the mechanism of respiration. We have understood the four processes which involve in the mechanism of respiration. Those are breathing, external respiration, internal respiration and cellular respiration. Now we are going to understand the regulation of breathing. Now we have seen or we have understood which organs participate or which organs help in the process of respiration, and all those organs are controlled by something, right? So as we know that the organ systems in our body are controlled by the brain. So this process of respiration, the organs which are involved in it, those organs are also controlled by the brain. Now we also know that there are two steps in breathing. First is the inspiration and second is expiration. Now this expiration and inspiration, that is inspiration means inhalation of air and expiration means exhalation of air. So this one time when we inhale the air and the same air when we exhale, that is called as one breath. So in the newborn babies, the rate of respiration is about 44 breaths per minute, and whereas in adults the rate of respiration is 12 breaths per minute. Now why there is a difference? Because in the newborn babies the organs are new, the brain is new and they are growing, right? They are developing. So they need more and more oxygen. In our body, the brain needs more oxygen as compared to the other parts. So in the newborn babies, the organs are new, their body is growing, their brain is growing, so it needs more and more oxygen. So their body takes about 44 breaths in per minute. Whereas in adults, the body is already grown up, the organs don't need to grow more. So the rate of respiration decreases, that is 12 breaths per minute. Also, second thing, that is in the newborn babies, the organs are new. So they don't have much practice of respiration. Their organs do not have much practice of respiration. Whereas in the adults, the body of the adults or the organs of the adults, they have went through certain circumstances and they have learned how to control their breathing. So this is the difference, why the rate of respiration in the newborn babies is more than the adults. It is 44 breaths per minute in the newborn babies and 12 breaths per minute in the adults. Now this breathing is of two types. First is the voluntary breathing and second is involuntary breathing. Voluntary breathing means the breathing which we control, and involuntary means which we cannot control. Whenever we speak or we sleep or when we are sitting normally, at that time we breathe normally, right? That is the normal breathing, uncontrolled breathing. But when we exercise, when we perform yoga, at that time we learn how to control our breaths, right? So that is the voluntary breathing, controlled breathing. But this voluntary breathing has some limitations. If we control it more and more, what happens? Our brain does not get enough oxygen. So our body can faint because of that, because of the lack of oxygen that our brain doesn't get. Because of that, our body can faint. So there are limitations of the voluntary breathing. Now there are two parts of the brain which are involved in the breathing process. First is the pons and then the medulla. Now here this pons, medulla and the midbrain, together they are called as the brain stem. So we are going to see only these two parts, the main parts which are involved in the respiration process or breathing process, that is pons and medulla. Now this pons is also called as the Pneumotaxic Center, and this medulla is called as the Apneustic Center. Now medulla, there are two parts. First is the dorsal part and second is the ventrolateral part. Dorsal part controls only breathing. Inspiration. That's why it is called as the inspiration center. Whereas the ventrolateral part, it controls inspiration as well as the expiration. So the pons is called as Pneumotaxic Center. Medulla is called as Apneustic Center. Now this pons, what it does, Pneumotaxic Center, it limits the following things. It limits inspiration, again slow wave of sleep and rapid eye movement. All these things are limited by the slowed down by the Pneumotaxic Center or pons. Whereas Apneustic Center or medulla, what it does, it promotes inspiration, rapid eye movement and wakefulness. So both the centers are opposite to each other. One limits or slows down the inspiration, it slows down the slow wave sleep and rapid eye movement. Whereas the Apneustic Center, it promotes inspiration or it increases inspiration, it increases rapid eye movement and wakefulness. Now what are these wakefulness and the slow wave sleep? Now sleep, there are 4 stages in sleep. There are 4 stages in sleep. First is the light transitional sleep. Now in this stage what happens, this stage occurs when you are trying to sleep. In this stage drowsiness begins and this stage lasts about 5 to 10 minutes. This stage is when you try to sleep. And your head is drowsy. So this stage occurs about 5 to 10 minutes. The next is more stable sleep. In this stage, the body temperature and the heart rate drops and the brain begins to send sleep spindles. Now what happens? The brain begins to send sleep spindles or sleep messages. So what happens? The chemical which are created here, those chemicals, they block the senses and that's why the body temperature and the heart rate drop. The next is deep sleep. So in this stage what happens? The muscles relax, the blood pressure and the breathing rate drops down. So here in deep sleep what happens? The muscles, they relax and the blood pressure and the heart rate also drops. And in this deep sleep stage what happens? Growth hormone is released. The next is revitalizer or wakefulness. Revitalizer sleep or wakefulness. Now here the brain becomes more active and the body becomes relaxed and immobilized and the dreams occur and eyes move more rapidly. So what happens in this wakefulness state? The brain becomes more and more active, but the body becomes relaxed and it becomes immobilized, and this is the state where the dreams occur. So when we see the dreams, our eyes move rapidly, isn't it? Even though they are closed, they move rapidly. So that is the rapid eye movement. So this first stage, that is light transitional sleep, and the fourth stage, that is revitalizer sleep or wakefulness, these two stages are controlled by the apneustic center. They occur when the apneustic center is active, and that's why we do not have enough sleep, or we wake up again when we sleep. After some time we again wake up. And this second step, that is more stable sleep and the deep sleep, these two stages are controlled by the Pneumotaxic Center. So this is the coordination between the stages of the sleep and these two centers. So when we are in deep sleep, at that time this Pneumotaxic Center is active, and this at this time what happens, our body does not perform any work, so our brain also doesn't have to perform more work. Brain needs, so therefore brain needs less oxygen. So that's why here this Pneumotaxic Center, what it does, it slows or it limits the inspiration, slows down the inspiration process. It also slows down the slow wave of sleep, means our body goes into deep sleep when this center is active. And also rapid eye movements are limited, it limits the rapid eye movement. And in this light transitional sleep or this wakefulness, what happens, our brain becomes active, this new apneustic center becomes active, our brain becomes active and it starts performing work. So that's at that time what happens, this inspiration increases, so our body becomes awake, that is wakefulness, and also the rapid eye movement increases. So that's why when we wake up in the morning, if we have a dream, when we wake up in the morning, we remember all that because our body is not in a deep sleep. We are in a wakefulness state. So that's why we remember what we saw in the dream. So this is how the coordination is between the sleep and the stages of sleep and these two centers. Now this cycle of the sleep has all these four stages continuously occurring. That is the cycle of the sleep, and it is about 90 to 120 minutes. Now if you say you have sleep for 6 hours, if you sleep for 6 hours, so in those 6 hours, this all these four stages of sleep or this cycle of sleep normally occurs 2 or 3 times. Now let us see how the regulation of breathing is done by the brain. So here, this is the brain, these 2 points, one is the pons and other is the medulla. These are called as the breathing control centers. And this is the heart and these are the lungs. Now what in previous parts we have seen that when we breathe in the air or when we inspire the air, what happens? The intercostal muscles which are present in between the ribs, what happens? Those muscles, they stretch, they lift up the, they push the rib cage outwards, or they push that rib cage outwards or forwards. So what happens? It creates the space for the lungs to expand, and as the air goes inside the lungs they expand, and this rib cage also expands, the cavity also expands. Now this intercostal muscles, they have stretch receptors in them. What these stretch receptors do, as these muscles, intercostal muscles, they have stretched up to their maximum capacity, what these stretch receptors do, they send a stimulus to the expiration center, and that expiration center sends the stimulus to the inspiratory center, and that inspiratory center stops sending stimulus, so the inspiration process stops. So what happens in the medulla, the ventrolateral part of the medulla, we have seen it controls the inspiration as well as the expiration. So here there are inspiratory center and expiratory center. So it sends these intercostal muscles, they have stretch receptors. These stretch receptors, they send stimulations to the expiratory center, and expiratory center sends messages or stimulus to the inspiratory center. Then this inspiratory center stops sending stimulus to the lungs, so the inspiration stops. We have also seen that during inspiration, this diaphragm, it becomes flat, isn't it? the dome shaped diaphragm, it becomes flat. So the air, when the air is taken in, the cavity expands, the lungs expand, the diaphragm becomes flat, and what happens? The intercostal muscles, they stretch to their maximum capacity, and the intercostal muscles, they have stretch receptors in them. Those stretch receptors, they send stimulus to the expiratory center. Expiratory center sends stimulus to the inspiratory center. Inspiratory center then stops sending stimulus to the lungs through this phrenic nerves. So the inspiration stops, and as the inspiration stops, what happens? Expiration takes place. Expiration takes place, the air is released, and these lungs, they again deflate. They become deflated. So here, as these lungs, they become deflated, what happens? The stretch receptors which are present here, they become inactive. So as the stretch receptors, they become inactive, what happens? At the same time, this heart, in this heart, the concentration of carbon dioxide increases and the oxygen level decreases. So what happens? This heart, it sends the stimulus to the brain, to the ventrolateral part of the medulla. It sends the stimulus that carbon dioxide level has been increased and oxygen level has been decreased. So what happens? It sends stimulus. As the stimulus is reached to the medulla, ventrolateral part of the medulla, again this medulla, it sends stimulus to the lungs. And as the stimulus reaches the lungs, again the inspiration process starts. So in this way, as the inspiration process starts, the lungs expand, the ribs expand, and the intercostal muscles, they stretch. The stretch receptors which are present over here, they again send a stimulus to the expiratory center, and the inspiratory center stops sending stimulus to the lungs, and inspiration stops. So this cycle continues, and this cycle is called as the Herring-Brunner's reflex. This cycle of inspiration and expiration is called as the Herring-Brunner's reflex. So this is how the regulation of breathing is done by the brain, or is controlled by the brain. Now there is another term that is called as modified respiratory movements. Modified respiratory movements, they are different from the normal respiratory movements, and they are of two types. First, to help in expressing the emotions. These movements, they help in expressing the emotions, and they occur due to the reflexes. And second, they are voluntary movements. Second are voluntary movements. Our body does it purposefully. So, or they are controlled by our body. So, for example, coughing and yawning, these are the voluntary movements. So, these are modified respiratory movements. So far, we have seen that breathing is of two types: inspiration, expiration. Inspiration and expirating the same air which is being inhaled, that is called as one breath. And in newborn babies, the rate of respiration is about 44 breaths per minute, and in adults it is 12 breaths per minute. Breathing is of two types: voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary breathing means controlled. When we control the breathing, for example, when we exercise or when we perform yoga, at that time we control the breathing. So that is the voluntary breathing. Whereas involuntary breathing, normally when we speak, when we sit, or when we sleep, at that time the breathing is done, that is involuntary breathing. Now there are two parts of the brain which are involved in the process of respiration, that is pons and medulla. Pons is also called as Pneumotaxic Center. Medulla is called as Apneustic Center. This Pneumotaxic Center, it limits the inspiration and it slows the wave sleep and rapid eye movement. Whereas the Apneustic Center, it promotes inspiration and rapid eye movement and wakefulness. So this medulla has the two parts, dorsal part which is an inspiration center and ventrolateral part which controls the inspiration as well as the expiration. Now these two centers, they are coordinated with the sleep cycle. Sleep cycle has 4 stages. The light transitional sleep, in this stage the drowsiness begins and this stage lasts for 5 to 10 minutes. Second is the more stable sleep stage. In this stage, the body temperature and the heart rate drops down and brain begins to send sleep spindles. Next is the deep sleep. The muscles here in this stage relax and blood pressure and breathing rate becomes slow or drops down, and also the growth hormone is released in this stage. The next is the revitalizer sleep or the wakefulness. Here the brain becomes more active and the body becomes relaxed or immobilized, and this is the stage when we see the dreams or the dreams occur and the eyes move rapidly. One cycle is about 90 to 120 minutes. We have also seen how the brain controls the process of respiration or the regulation of breathing. We have seen when we breathe, at that time the lungs expand and the intercostal muscles, they stretch. As the intercostal muscles stretch to their maximum capacity, the stretch receptors which are present in them, they are sent towards the expiratory, they send a stimulus towards the expiratory center. This stimulus is then sent to the inspiratory center, and inspiratory center then stops sending the stimulus to the lungs and inspiration stops. As the inspiration stops, the expiration begins and the air is released out of the lungs. As the air is released out, the lungs become deflated, and as the lungs become deflated, the stretch receptors here become inactive. And at the same time, in the heart, the concentration of carbon dioxide increases and the oxygen level decreases. So this heart, it sends stimulus to the ventrolateral part of the medulla, and this ventrolateral part of the medulla then sends stimulus to the lungs, and again the inspiration starts. This cycle continues in this way. So this cycle is called as the Herring-Brunner's reflex. This cycle of breathing is called as the Herring-Brunner's reflex. Then again we saw the term, that is modified respiratory movements. Modified respiratory movements are different from the normal respiratory movements. So these modified respiratory movements, they help to express the emotions and they occur due to the reflexes. They are not done voluntarily. They occur due to the reflexes. And second, these modified respiratory movements, some of them are also voluntary movements. For example, the movements when we do while coughing and yawning. So coughing means whenever the mucus which gets stuck in the throat, at that time what we do, we cough to remove that mucus, right? So that is the voluntary movement. Or modified in order to clean the throat, we cough. So that is the modified respiratory movement.